Tonight we're going to look at a concept that you probably feel like you already know. But there is danger in forgetting. So let's not forget the God that we serve. The capital L-O-R-D in almost every translation of the Bible stands for, in many cases, not all, but in most cases, the name of God. It is 4 letters in Hebrew, Y-H, V-H, or W-H, depending on how you read Hebrew. Many Hebrews refuse to pronounce it at all. The name Lord comes from changing some of those letters around as a sign of respect for who they are talking about. Respecting Him so much that they won't even use His name for fear of using it in vain. It's a good reminder for us of the God that we serve. So tonight we'll look at God showing Himself to be holy and what that means for us. 3 of the 10 commandments discuss putting God apart, setting Him apart, Him being special and different. The first, and we'll read the 10 commandments from Deuteronomy. It's in Deuteronomy and Exodus. We're going to read it from Deuteronomy chapter 5. In verse 7, you shall have no other gods before me. There is nothing that you should elevate in your life in front of God. The second commandment, typically shortened to you shall not make yourself any carved image, or you'll have no idols. But verses 8 through 10 continue, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, and then the name of God, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of our fathers on the children, to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Doesn't quite fit on a scroll, does it? Like the 2 stone tablets that you typically see displayed. No idols, thou shalt have no idols, is typically something for number 2. It's this much fullness. Anything that you would set up in your life. I remember having a discussion with some people when I was a young kid about necklaces that had crosses on them and making sure that those didn't become something that you would worship instead of God, or giving God Himself some kind of object that you worship in His name. And the warning is here, regardless of whether you wear the necklace or have a tattoo or whatever it would be, to remind you to be a good person, to be Christ-like. The commandment to the Israelites is not to set up any idol that they would worship as a proxy for worshiping God, or even worse, that is not even a proxy for worshiping God. The 3rd commandment in verse 11, you shall not take the name of, and then the name of God is written, your God in vain, for the, and then the name of God is written. Will not hold him guiltless who takes His name in vain. And so this is one of those commandments where we can see that the Israelites and now the Hebrews today, and many that study and read from that book, they won't use His name. There's no chance they can get it wrong. But how many, what is the word for euphemisms? How many euphemisms are used in place of the name of God, or the name of Gosh, or the name of Golly, that we would put in and not show proper respect to the one who is our Creator. So this is the first 3 commandments given. God is separate. He's different. He's important. The commandments are not binding to us. They were nailed to the cross, and Drew did a great job of covering that in the Hebrew class, if you need to go back and freshen up. But Drew did a really great job of explaining how Jesus has fulfilled the law, and that these guardian principles are no longer applicable to us. They're for us to learn from. And yet, God being special is an eternal principle. Just because the Ten Commandments are not bound on Christians today doesn't change the fact that the one who called you is holy. And Peter encourages us in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 15 to be holy in all of our conduct. He ties it back to the command that was given to the Israelites that Peter says, you are to be holy. Oh, I've got to go back and read it. You are to be holy because the one who called you is holy. Since it is written, verse 16, you shall be holy for I am holy. He takes that out of Leviticus chapter 19 where the Lord has told Moses, where God himself by name has spoken to Moses and said, you shall be holy for God himself by name. Our God is holy. He is so much different, and that's what we're called to be, and that's what the Israelites were called to be. A separate kind of nation, a different kind of people, not like everybody in the world around them. Sound familiar, right? That's what we're to be, separate from everybody else, that we are after a different goal, that we are following after one who is different than us, who is different than everything. God is unique. There is none like him. None can compare. No God his equal. There's no prince that is his heir. Saints, lift your voices. There is something that separates God, our Creator, from everything else. Not most things, but everything else. And it's his purity. He is exactly what he is. There is no more to God and there is no less to God. God is not more pure or more holy today than he was yesterday. And he's not increasing or decreasing in purity or holiness for tomorrow. God is something that is so much different than we have, than we can see, than we can understand. He's different. Written by Dr. Craig Bean in a lectureship series, and a very loving brother of mine. The Hebrew term for holy, kadosh, is thought to carry the original meaning of to cut or to cut off, and communicates the idea of being set apart. A thing, person, or place is holy if it is set apart for a special use. Other words one might use are words like distinctive or different. As applied to God, holiness is a characteristic that sets him apart from his creation. There are many biblical verses that speak of God being on high, in his holy temple, looking down, reigning, exalted above, or seated above the heavens. These verses all picture God as separate from his creation and ruling over it. God is not of this creation. He's outside of it. And so we fail to understand him completely because we do not know anything that is devoid of time. And we don't know of anything that is devoid of change. And we don't know anything that is devoid of an occupation of space. It's always somewhere. And yet these three things are descriptions of God, and they mark out his otherness, his being different than everything in his creation. God always was. The earth always not... How do you conjugate that? The earth wasn't always. God is everywhere. We don't have concept of that. How can you be everywhere? God doesn't change. How is something non-changeable and yet able to make decisions and to give mercy and to grant lenience? It's beyond, because God is different. So, what do we do with that? The Ten Commandments in both Deuteronomy and in Exodus both start the same way. Before the commandments are given, there is an identification of the giver. And God himself, by name, claims I am, and gives his name. And he says, I am your God, your mighty one, your strong one, your champion, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Before giving rules or telling the people what he expects of them, he identifies himself. I am your Savior. I saved you. He is different. He is to be set apart and worshipped correctly. In giving the law, we continue in Deuteronomy in chapter 16. It's right at the end of Deuteronomy 16. And continuing into the 17th chapter. You shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of, and it gives the name of our God, your God, that you shall make. And you shall not set up a pillar which, and it gives the name of our God, your God hates. Chapter 17 continues, you shall not create a sacrifice to, gives the name of our God, your God, as an ox or a sheep in which is a blemish or any defect, for that is an abomination to, and it gives his name and calls him our God. God is very particular about how he desires to be worshipped. It's not of things of this earth. It's not with the things on this earth. And if we would recall, what is promised to those who will be Christians is that we won't worship in one place or in another place. Then we won't do it by certain sacrifices or not. We'll worship in spirit and in truth. That we'll come to him as he requires, not just requests of us. By the way, Bobby, this is where Easter is mentioned. We talked about it in the past. If you were keeping track, that you shall not plant any tree as an Asherah, and that eventually becomes the goddess that gives the name Easter for the holiday. The consequences of improper worship are dramatic. I'm going to read two sets of scriptures back to back. So let's look and notice in these sets of scriptures the particularities of how we are to worship or how we are to not worship. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, starting in verse 2, if there is found among you with any of your towns that, and it gives the name of our God, your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of, and it gives the name of our God, your God, in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven which I have forbidden, and it is told you and you hear of it, and you shall inquire diligently, and if it is true that and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel, you shall bring out to your gates that man or woman that has done the evil thing, and you shall stone the man or woman to death with stones. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, the one person is to die. The one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of one witness. The hand of the witness shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. You cannot worship God in any kind of way. It has to be as he has prescribed. In Leviticus 19, starting in verse 3, every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am, and God gives his name, your God. Do not turn to any idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am, and God gives his name, your God. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to, and God gives his name, you shall offer it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten on the same day you offer it, or the day after, and anything left over until the 3rd day shall be burned up with fire. If it is eaten at all on the 3rd day, it is tainted. It will not be accepted. And everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to, and our God gives his name. And that person shall be cut off from his people. There's 2 sets of scriptures, these 2 sets of scriptures on worshiping our God. And they are very similar. Notice that the second one starts with setting up that your parents are going to teach you to do this, and you're going to pay attention to the festivals. Wonder why that is. It's because God has set a natural order for things, the way that they should be done. And that not only is He separate and apart, but He has set reminders at every marker so that we would remember Him. Whether it's life and where life comes from, whether it's foliage and remembering life. How does foliage remember life? We'll go look outside. A week ago there was barrenness, and now all of a sudden every tree out there has got leaves. And if you don't believe me, we're all going to start sneezing and eyes watering and running soon because of the pollen. And so even the plants remind us of the cycle of life and regeneration and where that comes from. And it's incumbent, it's actually given and required of the parents. Teach your children these things. God is special. He's different. He's set apart. And He is to be revered. The feasts are set forth, the Sabbaths, and then the feasts are set up to remember those things in cycle as well. So why does one of these sections employ capital punishment and the other one shall be cut off from his people is how it's termed. He shall be cut off from his people is Leviticus 19 verse 8. But it's the same thing. You're no longer part of God's people. Is there any point in living at all? Then you're stuck with just this life. And that's pretty miserable. Remember the pretext of giving these commandments in the first place. How does God start off before ever giving the 10 commandments? He saved you. So being cut off or being separated from that is no better than any other thing. It's no better than death. God saved us, and we should always remember that before any of the particular rules that we would follow. There's a reason why we have the rules in the first place, and that's because God wants us to be like Him. There is a concept that we have been getting close to that we've got really close to with Korah's rebellion. And it's this idea of breaking out. So Exodus 19, verse 23 and 24 read, Moses said to, and he called God by name, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And then God by name said to him, go down and come up and bring Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through and come up to, and he calls himself by name, lest he break out against them. God is so pure and so holy, so other, so righteous, that the impurities around Him can't exist. So let's go with an analogy, if you'll allow it, and understand that any analogy using something created is going to be far inferior than the purity of God. Say you had your kid you had athletic pants, and they're nice and white, you know, like the school up the road, and they slid through the clay to make it to base or to whatever. And then they're playing in the outfield, and they slid through the outfield, so they've got clay compounded with grass. And instead of having to wash and actually never getting those clothes clean, you would just approach it with something, and the ugly would go away. It would just run away from it. It'd be consumed by it. The stains on the garment themselves, it would just vanish and be dissolved, burned up, just gone away, because this thing approached it. This is the concept that's being discussed here in Exodus 19. The commonality of this world, that the sin that's here, that the not pure and holy, when God approaches it, it cannot exist anymore, and it's just lest God break out against them. God doesn't have to approach with a strong hand or with a sword or with His army of hosts. All he has to do is pull back the veil. And anything that's not pure, like he is pure, can't exist there. God isn't looking to punish people. He's looking to make them into the purity or the holiness or the righteousness. He's looking to cleanse their souls so that when he pulls that veil back, they can still be there. You remember the 250 that were with Korah in the rebellion? And God says, get back. I'm going to pull the veil back. I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them me. And they're gone. Like I said, the little censer's still spinning on the ground there as the fire has consumed them. Or what about Nadab and Abihu as they approach the altar of God and they offer foreign or strange fire, or they offer the wrong thing to God? The fire of God comes forth and consumes them. Like, I'll pull back the veil. If you really want to come do that, God will allow you to see, but there's nothing there that you will see because you can't get close enough because of his purity. What about one that wants to try? What about one that wants to get it right really bad? What about Uzzah? As the cart falters, as the Ark of the Covenant's being led up to the place where David is trying to take it, and the cart falters, and Uzzah reaches up and touches the seat of God. He's not pure enough to be there. And so as he comes close to that holiness, it consumes him. What about your heart as you pray to God? What about your heart as you try to walk through this walk? Because our God has identified himself as, by name, a jealous God, a consuming fire. Deuteronomy 4:24. He reiterates this principle for us in Hebrews chapter 12 and discusses that event of him pulling back the veil and exposing his purity to all of the commonality of this earth. In Hebrews chapter 12, we'll start in 27. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken. That is, things that have been made in order, that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. It's written in Peter, it's written in Thessalonians about the end of times when the trumpet sounds and the return of Jesus. Peter spells it out pretty specifically that the earth is going to be burned up and the heavens are going to catch on fire. And you really get this imagery of God just walking in. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for God to just walk in? To just pull back the veil and show his face? Are you ready for that day to come? While you contemplate that, let's read a couple of verses from Isaiah chapter 33 and we'll be concluded. Hear you who are far off what I have done, and you who are near acknowledge my might. The sinners of in Zion are afraid. Trembling has seized the godless. Who among us can dwell with a consuming fire? Who among us can dwell with everlasting burnings? He who walks uprightly and speaks uprightly, who despises the gain of oppressions, who shakes his hands lest they hold a bribe, who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed, and shuts his eyes from looking on evil. He will dwell in the heights. His place of defense will be the fortresses of rocks. His bread will be given to him. His water will be sure. Your eyes will behold the King in his beauty, and they will see a land that stretches afar. Your heart will muse on the terror. Where is he who counted Where is he who weighed tribute? Where is he who counted the towers? You will see no more the insolent people, the people of an obscure speech that you cannot comprehend, stammering in a tongue that you do not understand. Behold, Zion, the city of our appointed feasts. Your eyes will see Jerusalem in an untroubled habitation, an immovable tent, whose stakes will never be plucked up, nor any of its cords broken. But there, Yahweh in majesty will be for us a place of broad rivers and streams, where no galley with oars can go, nor majestic ship can pass. For Yahweh is our judge. Yahweh is our lawgiver. Yahweh is our king. He will save us. He will save those who, as this section of Isaiah describes, are righteous. He will save those who come to him in spirit and in truth. He will save those who have made themselves pure and able to stand. And the ones who can't? If you need to fix anything in your life so that you can stand before God when that trumpet sounds, if you need to be saved so that you know you'll be ready on that final day, that you can see God face to face, then make it known before we leave this evening.